Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the economic damage already done to Africa has been phenomenal and will set back many leaps in development seen over the last decades. Past the immediate threat of COVID-19, we speak to the OECD about what needs to happen to salvage developmental progress. Also, people who barely scrape by, begging on Johannesburg streets, are falling further through the cracks of South African society. 5 weeks of coronavirus lockdown has meant many who rely on handouts have nowhere to turn. And Senegal ploughs millions into food aid in the country as many struggle to get by after travel restrictions and a curfew cut them off from their livelihoods. But first, for now, Africa can cautiously say that it seems to be avoiding the worst of the predicted ravages of coronavirus on the continent. With around 32,000 official cases and fewer than 1,400 deaths, the figures suggest the region's efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 are having some effect. It's too early, though, to draw any firm conclusions about what happens next with regards to infection rates. But what is certain is the devastating economic impact that the pandemic is and will have. The continent's growth rate is likely to drop by 3 to 8 percentage points this year, jeopardizing over a decade and a half of growth. Earlier, I spoke to the head of the OECD's Development Center, asking whether it was too early to start talking about how to rebuild the continent's fortunes after it moves past the immediate race to contain the coronavirus pandemic.
We are facing a series of phenomena that will aggravate the problems that pre-existed and create even more opportunity for those that were already there. In particular, in two dimensions. First of all, we know that Africa had a lot of potential. In particular, the agreement on free trade could boost Africa in a phase in which the rest of the economy was declining or was reducing the speed. Africa was at 4.4% in the first years of this millennium, whilst Latin America was only at 2.4%. So we could take advantage of this opportunity. The COVID will create a period of uncertainty, but if we could insist in this direction, will be crucial. Second, together with the COVID, we are confronted with a series of social problems and the need to create some social net, if not entire social protection system. Therefore, now the way in which we intervene to support people that are unemployed or whose activity is stopped because the informal activity cannot continue with confinement, this period represents an incredible period to figure out how social protection system could be built for today and for tomorrow. So we are not late. We are actually at the right time.
So with this idea of investing more in social protection systems, is there anything else that's going to have to change as Africa tries to maintain its development drive coming out of the coronavirus pandemic?
For sure, there are a series of measures that will be put in place that will require very considerable cost, and this will be carried by the states. Now, let me give you an example. We calculate what would happen in Africa if we would adopt in Africa the same measure that were put in place in Europe or in China. Well, the debt will almost double. We'll get to 80% in average, but certain countries will be at 100% of debt on GDP. So here there is a major issue, how to finance the debt and how to finance the necessary investment that will follow at the debt in order to reconstruct the economy and the society. But at the same time, look what is happening. Foreign direct investment are going to be reduced of 30–40%. Remittances, which has a crucial input from outside to Africa, will be reduced as well. Why? Because many of the migrants work in countries that are specialized in producing oil. And we know that oil in this phase is reducing value and prices. The same happens with natural resources. So also this source will be largely reduced. Tourism is going to be very strongly affected. At the end of the story, if we add also some drama that will be related to the drought in the south of the continent, or the locust in the east of the continent, or what can happen in Sahel, if we sum all these factors, there will be a desperate need for financing. I don't think that in the mid and in the long term, this can be faced without serious fiscal reform. So the system of tax has for sure to change.
So a lot of stuff must change on the continent, but also there've been calls, and we've seen a lot of moves internationally to create a kind of consolidated global approach to support the continent going forward. Do you think that Africa plays a special role in this international approach to tackling the fallout from COVID-19?
I think that, first of all, Africa played and will continue to play a special role for the world economy. Remember, in 2019, we thought that the growth was going to be 2.9 for the whole globe, and trade would have been only increasing 0.7%, which means nothing. As such, the real sources of growth were not in the developed countries, where maybe in Asia, and will continue to be, less in Latin America. Africa could be a very crucial actor at that time as well as in the future. So Africa is in reality a resource for the rest of the world in general, if we are capable to reduce this period of COVID that will affect Africa seriously as short as possible. But Africa plays also a special role, as you were suggesting, in the fight against COVID, because it will be the last place where COVID will arrive. And obviously everybody is concerned by the way in which Africa will address the COVID. In one case or in the other, we need to work with Africa, as we need a global, in reality, health system. We need to support international organizations, not attack them, that deal with health, for sure. As I said, so in other terms, Africa is fundamental for health and for economic and social development after this crisis.
Mario Pezzini there speaking to me a little earlier on. Well, a guard was killed in Sierra Leone's capital on Wednesday as a prison was set on fire and inmates reportedly tried to break out. It's not clear what kicked off the riot at Pedemba Road Prison, but it comes after a coronavirus case was confirmed at the institution. The country's recorded 116 COVID-19 cases with 4 deaths. And this week, the government suspended criminal court for a month in order to reduce the possibility of infections in prison populations. Well, people who barely scrape by, begging on Johannesburg's streets, are falling further through the cracks of South African society. 5 weeks of coronavirus lockdown has meant many who rely on handouts have nowhere to turn. Many are cramped into dilapidated rooms, uncertain of where they'll get their next meal.
Before South Africa imposed a lockdown on March the 27th, beggars were a common sight in Johannesburg. Now there are very few because the police chased them away. In this dilapidated building, 24 blind beggars live with their families.
Our livelihood is centered on city begging. So now that the country is on lockdown, it is impossible for us to go out on the streets to look for donations.
The government has announced an increase in social aid for the poor, but it's only for South African citizens. Most of the beggars in this building come from Malawi and Zimbabwe.
As foreigners, we don't qualify for social grant in South Africa. So all we have to do is to beg for donations for our livelihood.
The lockdown is now in its 5th week and access to food is becoming critical.
I really understand that the coronavirus is killing a lot of people. But at the same time, if I'm locked in the room, it means I'm also going to die. So death is death. Due to corona or due to hunger is death.
Because of the coronavirus pandemic, the UN World Food Programme says the global number of people with acute hunger could almost double in 2020. It fears 265 million people could be affected by the end of the year.
Meanwhile, Senegal started a food aid scheme to help some of the millions who are struggling to get by there under the coronavirus restrictions. It's being funded from a €1.5 billion emergency fund set up by the state. Our correspondents report from Dakar.
Packages of food worth around €100 are being handed out in the Dakar suburb of Guinaw. These emergency aid kits are being distributed to communities suffering the most from the impact of COVID-19. The government's pilot programme was rolled out before crowds of journalists.
The government will provide for these families 100 kilos of rice, 10 kilos of sugar, 10 kilos of pasta, 10 litres of oil, and a pack of 18 300-gram lump soaps.
For Ndeye Ndiagne, these provisions are a lifesaver. Before the pandemic, her family received a state welfare allowance to get by, and so the household now also qualifies for emergency aid. She's calculated that the food she's being given should see her family through the next 2 months.
With coronavirus, life has become harder. With the restrictions on mobility, it is more difficult to work. We pray to God that this disease will be beaten. My children no longer work. It's become very difficult.
The government says around 8 million people will receive these kits. That's almost half of Senegal's population, but many in need will still miss out. Sheikh Oumar Diallo didn't get a package today, even though his income has recently plummeted. Since the government announced a curfew, he's had to close his shop at 8 p.m. daily.
Since they want to help everyone, the shopkeepers must not be left out. I hope that we will soon be among those getting help.
The government's pledged to be transparent in the process of distributing emergency food aid after civil society groups accuse the state of corruption and favouritism when awarding these contracts.
And in Nairobi, the Constitutional Court has refused to lift the ban on a Kenyan-made film about 2 women who fall in love. Rafiki, which means friend in Kiswahili, was banned for allegedly promoting homosexuality. It won international acclaim and in 2018 became the first Kenyan film to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. Rafiki's producer, Manuri Kahiu, appealed, arguing that the Kenyan ban was a violation of freedom of expression. She now plans on petitioning the Court of Appeal. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.